A humble black waitress helps billionaire CEO fix his car, until he realizes what's hanging around her neck. What if a simple act of kindness on a rainy Tuesday evening could change two lives forever, revealing that sometimes the most profound connections happen when we least expect them? The rain drummed against the windows of Mel's diner as Jasmine wiped down the last table of her double shift, her tired feet aching in worn sneakers that had seen better days. At 42, she'd been serving coffee and comfort food to truckers and travelers for nearly 15 years, always wearing the same delicate silver pendant around her neck, a small cross that caught the diner's fluorescent lights like a gentle beacon. Outside, the storm was getting worse, and most folks had already headed home to their warm houses and waiting families. But Jasmine stayed, as she always did, making sure every customer felt welcomed before closing time. Little did she know that in just a few minutes, a stranded stranger would walk through those glass doors, and that tiny piece of jewelry around her neck would unlock a story that would touch both their hearts in ways neither could imagine. "Where are you watching from tonight?" The bell above the diner door chimed as a man stumbled in from the storm, his expensive suit soaked through and his usually perfect hair plastered against his forehead. James Crawford, CEO of Crawford Industries, looked nothing like the polished executive who graced magazine covers and commanded boardrooms across the country. At 43, he'd built an empire through determination and long hours, but tonight he felt more helpless than he had in decades. His luxury sedan had broken down just 2 miles from the diner, leaving him stranded on a lonely stretch of highway with a dead phone battery and no idea how to fix anything more complicated than a computer program. Jasmine looked up from her cleaning and immediately saw the distress in his eyes. She'd served enough troubled souls over the years to recognize when someone needed more than just a cup of coffee. "Come on in, honey," she called warmly, setting down her dish rag. "You look like you've been wrestling with Mother Nature herself." James managed a weak smile as he approached the counter, water dripping from his Italian leather shoes onto the checkered linoleum floor. He'd never been inside a place like this, somewhere real people came to eat real food without pretense or presentation. "I'm sorry to bother you so close to closing time," James said, his voice carrying the weight of someone unused to asking for help. "My car broke down about 2 miles back, and my phone died. I was wondering if I could use yours to call a tow truck." Jasmine studied his face for a moment, noting the genuine politeness in his request despite his obvious frustration. She'd served plenty of wealthy folks who treated her like she was invisible, but this man looked her directly in the eyes when he spoke. "Of course you can use the phone," she said, pouring him a cup of fresh coffee without being asked. "But you might want to sit down first and warm up. You're shaking like a leaf in November wind." As she handed him the steaming mug, her pendant caught his attention for just a moment, though he couldn't quite place why it seemed familiar. The small silver cross was obviously old and well-loved, its surface worn smooth from years of handling. James wrapped his hands around the warm ceramic, feeling the first comfort he'd experienced in hours. "You're very kind. I have to admit, I don't know much about cars beyond putting gas in them and turning the key." Jasmine chuckled softly, a sound that reminded him of his grandmother's gentle laugh from childhood memories he'd almost forgotten. "Well, that makes two of us when it comes to fancy foreign cars. But sometimes the simple problems have simple solutions, and sometimes a person just needs to look under the hood with fresh eyes." After James made his calls, learning that the earliest a tow truck could reach him was morning due to the storm, Jasmine did something that surprised them both. "You know what? I've got some tools in my truck, and I've helped my brother fix enough vehicles over the years. Why don't we go take a look at your car together? Worst case, you'll know for sure what's broken. Best case, maybe we can get you back on the road tonight." The offer hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to find, and James realized he was about to trust a stranger in a way he hadn't done in years. 20 minutes later, Jasmine pulled her weathered pickup truck alongside James's gleaming sedan, her headlights illuminating the expensive car that looked completely out of place on the rural highway. She grabbed a toolbox from her truck bed, the same one her late father had used when he taught her the basics of engine repair during her teenage years. James stood uncertainly beside his car, realizing he'd never felt more out of his element despite all his business success. "Pop the hood for me," Jasmine called over the rain, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders. As the hood lifted, revealing the complex maze of an imported engine. She leaned in with the confidence of someone who understood that machines, like people, sometimes just needed the right kind of attention. James watched in amazement as she efficiently checked connections and tested various components, her pendant swaying gently as she worked. "Tell me something," she said, wiping her hands on an old rag. "When's the last time you actually looked under here yourself?" James shifted uncomfortably, realizing how dependent he'd become on other people solving his problems. "Honestly, never. I've always just paid someone else to handle these things." Jasmine paused in her work, studying his face in the glow of the headlights. "Nothing wrong with that, but sometimes it helps to understand what makes things work. This alternator belt looks loose, probably been making noise for weeks, but you might not have noticed over the sound of city traffic." As she adjusted the belt with practiced hands, James found himself sharing more than he'd intended. "I used to be different, you know. Growing up, my family didn't have much money. My mom worked 3 jobs just to keep us afloat, and I promised myself I'd never let her struggle again." The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, creating an intimate space around the two cars where honest conversation seemed natural. But somewhere along the way, I stopped paying attention to the details. Stopped connecting with real people doing real work. Jasmine tightened the belt and tested the tension, then looked up at him with understanding eyes. "Success can be funny that way. Sometimes it builds walls instead of bridges." She paused, her hand unconsciously touching the cross at her throat. "My daddy used to say that every person you meet knows something you don't, and every skill you learn makes you more human, not less." James watched her work with growing respect, recognizing a wisdom that hadn't come from boardrooms or business schools. "Try starting it now," she said, stepping back from the engine. James turned the key, and the car roared to life with a healthy purr. The relief on his face was immediately replaced by something deeper. A recognition that this woman had given him something more valuable than a simple repair. "I can't believe you fixed it just like that," he said, genuinely amazed. "How much do I owe you?" Jasmine smiled, shaking her head as she closed the hood. "Nothing at all. Just pass it forward when you get the chance. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up." As James prepared to thank her and drive away, his eyes fell again on the pendant around her neck, and this time something clicked in his memory. Something that would change everything he thought he knew about this chance encounter. "Wait," James said suddenly, his voice catching as he stared at the cross pendant. "That necklace, where did you get it?" Jasmine's hand moved instinctively to the familiar weight at her throat, her expression shifting from friendly openness to something more guarded. She'd worn this piece every day for 15 years, and very few people had ever asked about it directly. "It belonged to someone very special to me," she replied carefully, studying James's face as understanding began to dawn. James felt his world tilt as memories rushed back, memories he'd buried under years of corporate success and emotional distance. "The engraving on the back," he whispered, hardly daring to breathe. "Does it say, 'For my angel, love Mom'?" Jasmine's eyes widened in shock, her hand trembling as she reached behind her neck to unclasp the necklace. With shaking fingers, she turned it over to reveal the tiny engraved words that James had somehow known would be there. "How could you possibly?" she began, but her voice trailed off as she saw the recognition and pain written across his features. James leaned against his car, suddenly looking far older than his 43 years. "Because I bought that necklace 26 years ago for my mother, Catherine Crawford. She was working as a night shift cleaner in downtown offices, trying to save money for my college tuition. I wanted to give her something beautiful for her birthday, something that showed how much I loved her." The rain had stopped completely now, leaving only the sound of their breathing and the distant hum of highway traffic. Jasmine felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as pieces of a puzzle she'd carried for years finally started to fit together. "Your mother," she whispered. "She was my supervisor at Morrison Building Services. Catherine was like a second mother to me when I started working there as a teenager. She helped me through some of the darkest times in my life." James closed his eyes, remembering the woman who had raised him with such strength and love, who had worked countless late nights so he could have opportunities she'd never dreamed of for herself. "She died in that car accident when I was 28, he said quietly. "I was already starting to make good money, finally able to take care of her, but I was always too busy with work to spend much time together. I thought I'd have years to make up for lost time." "She talked about you constantly," Jasmine said softly, stepping closer. "How proud she was, how you were going to change the world. But she also worried that success might change you, make you forget where you came from." She held the pendant between them like a bridge across time and loss. "The night she died, she was coming to my apartment to help me with my sick baby. She'd just gotten off her shift, but she always made time for people who needed her." James looked at this woman who had somehow carried a piece of his mother with her all these years, who had inherited not just her jewelry but her spirit of kindness and service. "She gave you the necklace," he realized, his voice thick with emotion. "Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments." The storm had passed, but a different kind of tempest was just beginning as both of them grappled with the impossible connection that had brought them together on this lonely road. "She gave it to me the week before she died," Jasmine confirmed, her voice filled with the weight of cherished memory. "I was struggling to pay for my daughter's medical bills, working double shifts, and barely keeping our heads above water. Catherine found out and insisted on helping, even though she didn't have much herself. When I tried to refuse, she took off this necklace and put it around my neck. She said it carried a mother's love, and that I needed it more than she did." James felt something break open inside his chest, a dam of grief and regret that he'd spent 15 years carefully constructing. "I never knew she'd given it away," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "After the accident, I looked everywhere for that necklace. I wanted something of hers to hold on to, something that would remind me of better times. When I couldn't find it, I thought it had been lost in the wreckage." Jasmine reached out tentatively and placed her hand on his arm, the same gentle gesture of comfort she'd learned from Catherine all those years ago. "Your mother used to tell me stories about you when we'd take our breaks together. She'd show me pictures and talk about how determined you were, how you never gave up on anything you set your mind to. But her favorite memories weren't about your successes, they were about the little moments. The way you'd leave her silly notes in her lunchbox, how you'd call her every Sunday morning without fail, the time you surprised her with roses just because it was Tuesday." The truth hit James like a physical blow, forcing him to confront the man he'd become versus the son he'd once been. "I stopped calling every Sunday after I got promoted to vice president," he admitted, shame coloring his voice. "I told myself I'd call when I had more time, when the next big deal was finished, when things calmed down. But they never did, and before I knew it, months would go by between our conversations." Jasmine nodded with understanding, having watched this same pattern destroy relationships in her own life. "She knew you loved her, James. She never doubted that for a second. But she also worried that you were losing yourself in your success, becoming someone who forgot the value of small kindnesses and simple human connections." She paused, looking directly into his eyes. "She would have been proud of how polite you were to me tonight, how you looked me in the eye and said please and thank you. Those things mattered to her more than any business deal ever could." As they stood in the quiet aftermath of the storm, James realized that finding this necklace, finding Jasmine, wasn't just a coincidence. It was an opportunity to honor his mother's memory in the way she would have wanted, by remembering the values she tried to instill in him before ambition and success had clouded his vision. "What was your daughter's name?" he asked suddenly. "The one Catherine helped you care for?" "Melody," Jasmine answered, a proud smile breaking through her tears. "She's 25 now, a nurse at Children's Hospital downtown. She never knew Catherine, but she's heard so many stories that she feels like she did." If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. The connection between past and present was becoming clearer, and James was beginning to understand that this meeting was about more than fixing cars or finding lost jewelry. 3 months later, James stood in the newly opened Crawford Community Learning Center, watching Jasmine teach a group of teenagers basic auto maintenance in the state-of-the-art workshop they designed together. The facility offered free job training, literacy programs, and life skills classes to anyone who needed them, funded by a foundation James had established in his mother's memory. Above the main entrance, a simple bronze plaque read, Catherine Crawford Community Center, where every person matters. Jasmine still wore the silver cross pendant every day, but now she understood its full significance as a bridge between two families who had been connected by love long before they ever met. Her daughter, Melody, had graduated from nursing school debt-free thanks to a scholarship from James's foundation, and she often stopped by the center to volunteer in the after-school program. The three of them had become an unlikely family, bound together by shared loss and the determination to honor Catherine's memory through service to others. James had made other changes too, stepping back from the daily operations of his company to focus on meaningful work that connected him with real people facing real challenges. He'd learned to change his own oil, fix basic car problems, and most importantly, he'd learned to slow down long enough to have genuine conversations with the people around him. Every Sunday morning, he called Jasmine just to check in, maintaining the tradition of weekly family calls that his mother had started decades earlier. "Your mama would be so proud," Jasmine told him as they watched the teenagers successfully change their first spark plugs, their faces glowing with accomplishment. "Not because of the money you've donated or the buildings you've built, but because you remembered who you really are underneath all that success." James nodded, thinking about how different his life had become since that stormy night when a kind stranger had fixed more than just his broken-down car. The center had become a gathering place for people from all walks of life, just as Catherine would have wanted. Former executives learned alongside former inmates, teenagers worked beside senior citizens, and everyone was treated with the same dignity and respect that Catherine had shown to every person she'd ever met. The walls were covered with photos of graduates who'd found jobs, started businesses, or simply discovered new confidence in their abilities. As the evening class wound down and students began to pack up their tools, James reflected on how finding his mother's necklace had led him to find something even more valuable, a sense of purpose that money couldn't buy and a connection to his mother's values that would guide him for the rest of his life. Jasmine had given him more than car repair that night. She'd given him back his soul. "Same time next week?" Jasmine asked, hanging up her work apron beside the dozens of others that represented all the lives being changed in this space. "Wouldn't miss it," James replied, knowing that his mother was somehow smiling down on the family they'd created from unexpected circumstances and shared love. The silver cross pendant caught the workshop lights as Jasmine moved, still carrying Catherine's love forward into the world, one act of kindness at a time. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining us on this journey of connection, remembrance, and the power of simple human kindness.